Home sellers, have you ever wondered how home appraisals really work? What factors influence a home's value during the appraisal? Well, stick around because in this episode, we sit down with Jamie Owen, who is an appraiser with over 26 years of experience. We're going to pull back the curtain on the entire appraisal process from determining market value to the square footage battle, what to do with basements, bonus rooms, all of it. All the questions that we get here at the Ohio Property Group on the regular are going to be asked and answered today on the podcast. Hi, and welcome to Talking Realty, the go-to podcast for home sellers looking to make more money, save time, and avoid headaches. Whether you're selling a flip, a new build, an income property, or the place you call home, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Glenn Whitten, 20-year realtor and founder of the Ohio Property Group. Selling a home can be a complicated and costly process that often leaves sellers feeling uncertain and overwhelmed. At the Ohio Property Group, we empower sellers with the tools and help they need to successfully reach the closing table, keeping more of their hard-earned money in their pocket where it belongs. To learn more, head over to talkingrealty.com, pick up our monthly newsletter or any of our free home seller tools. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Now, let's get to it. Today, I'm joined by Jamie Owen, a veteran appraiser who's been helping home buyers and sellers and lenders navigate the complexities of real estate appraisals since 1997. In our conversation, he shares his journey into appraisals. He breaks down the myths and the realities of valuation and gives us a pretty good behind-the-scenes look at how he approaches some of the unique challenges that go with home appraisals. We also take a look at how software has changed the game a little bit, and most importantly, what can sellers do to help themselves out during the appraisal, and what to do if there, God forbid, is a low appraisal. Whether you're prepping to sell or you just want to understand your home's value a little better, this episode is for you. So with that, let's welcome Jamie to the podcast. Jamie, how you doing? Thanks for being on.
I'm doing great, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's an honor.
So for those that don't know you or your story, please tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where life has taken you. How'd you wind up getting into appraisals? Start wherever you like.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I met my wife in the mid 90s, and she grew up in Ohio. And we met through some mutual friends, and she talked me into moving to Ohio. So we were married in 96. That's what brought me to Ohio. But that's why my company name is Appraisals. Some people are like, why
I get it.
Appraisals?
I get it.
That's why. And so at the time, I was looking for something to do other than what I was doing. And so she was a loan officer. And she said, you might like appraising and you might want to check into it. So I took her advice. I took some classes and I thought it was great. It was interesting. And that's really what got me going into the appraisal profession.
Yes. Women have a way of getting us to drag ourselves multi-states away.
Indeed.
I talked to so many people who were like, oh, were you born in Ohio? No, I was born in some other state far away. And it's always, oh, well, this relationship brought me here. It's never a job. It's always, well, I fell for this person and now here I am. But anyway, there's definitely worse ways to get somewhere. So, okay. So
that's for sure.
So you started taking some classes and now you're an appraiser. How long have you been appraising? I think I said it in the intro, but just make sure I'm right. Fact check me.
Yes. Since 98, technically the fall of 97, I got into the profession. So about 26 years now.
Dang. So when you got into it, I'm curious, did you picture yourself like after a year or two, like, okay, this is it. I found my groove. I'm going to do this forever. Or was it a stop off?
No, I did feel that way because I love this kind of work. It's interesting. Every house is different. Every property is different. So I've loved it the entire time. There's challenges to any career, but I love it. I really do. I always have.
What's the schooling like? I mean, maybe, or I don't know if you know, like now, if somebody was like, oh, I want to get into appraising, is it like what's involved in Ohio?
Yeah, there's still an apprenticeship. When I got into the business, it was 2 years just to get licensed. Now you can get licensed in 1 year if you meet all the criteria.
Mhm.
And then to be certified, I believe it's 2 years. And I don't know the hourly requirement now, but I know that they're trying to make it easier for people to get into the profession because we need help.
Oh, so there is demand.
So there is, yeah. And it's funny because that changes, right? With markets change, there's a high demand for appraisers, and then in the last couple of years things have dropped off, but it always changes.
Mhm.
There's always a need.
How big of a part of your daily life is, property goes under contract, bank calls an appraiser? Is that like a huge chunk or a small chunk?
Right now, it's over the past couple of years too. It's been about 20% of my work as lender work.
Really?
So things have really shifted. Yeah, my primary clients are attorneys, homeowners, uh, agents looking for a pre-listing appraisal. So, but I do a lot of divorce, probate, that kind of work.
Okay. I would have lost that bet. I would have assumed that the type of appraisals that we're talking about today were a bigger chunk, but you said like 1 in 5. That's interesting. I had no idea there was such a demand for appraisals outside of, but I live in a bubble, so what do I know?
No,
Anyway.
no, I think you're the majority. People just don't realize.
Yeah, for sure. So you've got some certifications. I pulled out a couple MNAA and HMS certifications. What are those? If you can tell me.
Yeah. So the MNAA, I'm a designated member of the National Association of Appraisers. So realtors have the National Association of Realtors, and there's also a National Association of Appraisers, albeit much smaller,
Hmm.
but it's a trade organization. And then with HMS, I'm certified. I've been trained to measure homes with the ANSI standards, and I have a certification for that with the Institute of Housing Technologies.
Okay. So it's not just what I think it is. You just walk in with your little cop accident wheel that you walk around with. That's not how it's done.
Not anymore.
Okay. There's some technology being thrown into this. All right. Good to
De-
know.
de-
So these certifications, they're optional, well, or not, or these things you
yeah,
do.
they're optional.
Okay. And you do, I'm
Yeah,
assuming you do them because you want professional growth or
exactly. Yeah, it's a nice way to stay connected to the industry, and I have a lot of connections through these organizations, especially the National Association of Appraisers.
Mhm.
So I believe in supporting an organization like this that is looking out for its members.
Sure, sure. Oh no, there's strength in numbers, no doubt about it, and a lot of shared knowledge. So
Yeah,
understood. So I know this is kind of a 101 question, but just so we're all on the same page, what exactly is an appraisal? Like, is it? And let me ask it this way: Is it the true market value of the property? Is it to confirm the purchase price, or what? How do you describe what it is that you do?
basically, an appraisal is a supportable opinion of value. And there are different types of value out there. There's market value, there's going concern value, there's different types of value. So we have to define in our report what definition we're using and where we got that definition from. But basically, it boils down to a supportable opinion of value.
Okay. So opinion of value will be our sort of working framework for this conversation. Excellent. And there are multiple approaches to this, right?
There are three approaches. There's the sales comparison approach where you use comparable
Hmm.
sales. There's the cost approach where you use either a reproduction cost or replacement cost. Typically, it's replacement cost, but there are times when we use reproduction cost. And then also the income approach. So that's where we develop an opinion of value based on the potential income of a property.
Do you take more than one approach when you do that, or does the bank tell you I want this approach, or that not the bank necessarily, but the whoever's ordering the appraisal? Do they tell you what kind of approach they want, or do you determine that?
Uh, it's, it's really up to the appraiser to make that determination. Most banks are going to always want the sales comparison approach, but if it's an income property, the income approach, you need to do that too. So
Got it.
that's kind of almost a given. But there are cases where someone may need a value for insurance purposes. They just want replacement cost. So that is an appraisal. You have to
That
develop
is
it.
an appraisal. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I hear the phrase get thrown around, highest and best use. Is that for you to determine, or is that part of your process?
Yes, it is. Yes. So yeah, when we look at any property, that's an important part of it. We have to determine if it's legally permissible to use something. Is it physically possible? Is it maximally profitable? But we consider that in every report.
Okay.
So and usually if it's a single family home, it's usually for a single family, but there are times when it's not.
Right.
So we have to check into that.
Yeah, I would
That's
think
part
if
of
it's a single family home that happens to be adjacent to a casino that's being built, there might be a higher and better use for that property than remaining a single family home.
Yeah, and zoning changes, so we have to consider that. If the zoning is going to change on a property, that could impact market value. So that all goes into it in our analysis.
So, two questions I get on a pretty regular basis from my sellers would be, what's a bedroom? Is there a definition, like a rule of thumb for what qualifies as a bedroom and what doesn't? That's one.
Uh, State by state, there's different guidelines, and there's I don't think there's anything really specific. Some states, like Ohio, have guidelines at 700 square feet. You have to have an ingress and an egress. Yeah, so you have to have a window or a sliding door, something to get into the bedroom, something to get out in case of an emergency.
Mm-hmm. Does it have to have a door?
Yes,
Okay.
it should have a door
Okay.
for privacy.
What about a closet? Does it need a closet?
I think it really depends on the market. If you've got an old home, and back when they built some old homes, there weren't closets in
Right.
some of the bedrooms. So I don't think that it really needs a closet if the market's not demanding it.
Okay.
But if on a newer home where people are looking at new homes, they all have closets, and now you've got one that doesn't, then it probably needs to have a closet.
What about the height? I hear this a lot as well. Like, it has to be a certain height in order to qualify as, is that for finished space or bedrooms or both?
For finished space, so
Okay.
everything that be considered finished. So yeah, the ceiling height has to be. It's generally 7 feet. And so if you've got a bungalow or a Cape Cod or some other home where you've got some sloped
Right.
ceilings, at least 50% of the area has to have ceiling heights of at least 7 feet. And where we count is from where the ceiling, if you were to measure from the floor to the ceiling, where the 5 foot mark is, that's where we start.
Well, that kind of leads into my second question is I get a lot of variation with, we'll pull before we put a property in the MLS, we have to verify the square footage with public sources like Realist or the auditor site or something like that. And, I'm sure you've heard this many times. The seller is like, that's not right. My house has blah, blah, blah more square footage. And so what do you do with that? I mean, each one of our MLSs governs that, so I don't really have a say in it, but I'm just curious from your perspective, do people come back at you with your appraisal and say, hey, you didn't count this square footage?
Sometimes, and it's usually because they're looking at the wrong place in the report. Because like a basement, they may have a walkout basement, and they're looking for that finished square footage to be in the gross living area, and we can't include it in the gross living area when it's below grade. In most cases, there are some weird exceptions, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, so I have to direct them that yes, I did value this this lower level or this lower level finished square footage, but this is where it's at in the grid. The same thing with like a Cape Cod or a bungalow where the ceiling height is lower than ANSI standards allows. It's not that we don't value it. In fact, if the market's valuing it the same as the main living area, we have to value it accordingly, but we have to report it in a different part of the
Got it.
appraisal.
Well, we're going to talk about
But,
cost per square foot here in a little bit because that's a real
Mhm.
hot topic in my world. But so
Yeah.
getting back to kind of residential appraisals, what is your role? Is it to protect the bank to make sure there's not some hijinks going on, or are you completely independent and none of this stuff matters? You're just here to put a value on it.
We're really just here to put the value on the property, to give our opinion of the market value. Of course, the banks use it to protect themselves, and there could be a measure of protection for a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
But really, our goal is to just measure the market value and give it to the bank, and the bank can do whatever they want with it. So, if somebody's getting a good deal on a property, then you might see an appraisal that's higher than the purchase price. That would make sense.
Yeah.
It's not a price validation really. It's really giving the bank what the full market value of the property is.
Some information. So while it does
Exactly.
protect the buyer in some regard, it's really more for the bank, I would assume, to
It's
look at the whole loan package and say, where are we on this?
Yeah, it is for the bank. In fact, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac forms
Mm-hmm.
state that the bank is the client, not the borrower or the homeowner. It's the bank.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in the certifications there. So if you read that, and people don't understand that, and they call us up, they're like, "Well, I want to talk to you about the appraisal," and you know, we have to tell them, "Well, I can if the bank will let me, because the bank's my client. This is for them."
So then
So,
when listing agent Glenn calls you and says, "Hey, I'm not with the bank or the buyer, but I still want to talk to you," that's a no, that's a non-starter.
that's a non-starter. I mean, I could talk to you in generalities
Sure.
about the process a little bit, but yeah, you're
Hmm.
right though. Yeah,
We can't have a backroom discussion. Okay, that's good. So
no.
what happens? There's a couple of things I want to touch on. Is during the appraisal visit and then sort of an overall timeline. I don't care which one we do first. Like from the time you get the order, just briefly, what's your process? I mean, do you just immediately set up the walkthrough, or do you do a bunch of homework first, or which which chicken and egg happens first, the walkthrough or the homework, or does the homework bookend the walkthrough?
It's a little different for every assignment. Most of the time, I will start before I even see the property. I'll run a market analysis. I want to know what the trends are in the market area.
Mhm.
So if I'm appraising a single family home, I'm going to pull all the single family home sales over a 2 year period, and I'm going to analyze that then a 1 year period and see what the trends are doing. Supply and demand, days on market, all list price changes, that kind of thing. And then I'll narrow it down to what I think are more competing properties. But the trick though is sometimes you think you know what's competing until you get to the property, and it's totally a different property than you imagine. Then
Right.
you've got to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But I have a pretty good idea generally of the property, especially if it's listed. You can look at the MLS photos.
Yeah. And you work a specific area? I forgot to ask you that, or do you cover a pretty broad area?
Well, fairly broad. It's Northeast Ohio.
Okay.
Um, so with the exception of Ashtabula County, I don't go up there anymore. I used to, but it's a haul. It's a haul.
I was going to say, if there's a reason I don't want to know, I don't want to get hate mail from
Yeah.
Ashtabula. But
Oh yeah, no, it's a great. That's where my wife grew up.
okay,
It's just a distance. That's the only
it's a
problem.
distance thing. So
Yeah.
many times, especially after 26 years, it's probably, is it unusual for you to find yourself working in an area where you're just like unfamiliar, or is that those days kind of in the past?
It is unusual, but every now and then I'll get an area that I just haven't been in for years. I just had one where it was Stark County. I was in Stark County for a long time, and then I stopped going down there, and I'm opened that back up. But I've got to go through and do a lot of research again to get myself familiarized with what's going on down in that market area. And of course, with every appraisal, I pull the stats fresh
Mhm.
every time. So that part
What
is
stats?
always good.
What are some of just
Uh, the changes in sales price, changes in price per square foot, changes in listing price, days on market, absorption rate, um, list to sales price ratio. Those are the things I really like to analyze the most.
okay? This is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm working on another project where we're talking through the whole concept of list price to sell price. You look at that, just why, what is there something specific you're looking for there?
Well, it does reflect market demand. Right now in most areas, the list to sales price ratio is 100%,
Hmm.
99, so that shows high demand. But as that drops, that might show a little bit of weakness in the market where things are softening price wise. So I look at it that way. And then also, if I'm using a comparable active listing or pending sale, especially an active listing,
Yeah.
sometimes we'll use that to make an adjustment to the listing to try to reflect if it sells, what is it likely to sell for.
So I have an alternate theory. Would you like to hear it?
Oh, I would love to.
Okay. I think for your purposes, that is absolutely perfect. That's what you're looking at, and that kind of tells you what you need to know as far as market demand. What I get and where I break this out is when I get sellers who will say, yeah, it might be overpriced, but if buyers are really interested, they'll make an offer. And my response is list price to sell price ratio is extremely close right now. Like it's less than 1%, or it's like 99.8 to, and for those of you who want to know the math, it's just take the list price, and let me make sure I do this correct. You take the price that it sold for, and divide it by the list price, and that gets you a ratio. So if it was listed for 200,000, sold for 200,000, that's a 100% ratio. It matched. But if it was listed for 200,000, sold for say 195, then that's a blip off. It'll be like 99 point something. So when we see list price to sell price ratios that are above 99%, I strongly encourage sellers to keep adjusting their price until they start getting offers, because it tells me that buyers are hanging out on the sideline if they see an overpriced property. Now, I don't know why. I have some theories about it, but I don't really know why buyers wouldn't make the offer. But for whatever reason, they're not doing it right now. That probably will change with the market. But so does this sound like voodoo math to you?
No, it makes perfect sense.
Oh,
Yeah. No, I hadn't really thought of it from that angle, but I like that. It makes perfect sense to me.
I love it when guests agree with me. You're my new favorite guest now. Don't tell any of my other guests.
Well, thank you. My lips are sealed.
That's right. Okay, so moving on. So okay, during that, so you get the order, you do your homework, you go look at the house, then you check your homework or maybe do some more homework, and then you bang it all into a report, right? And it goes somewhere, and then you're out. Like that's the end of it for you, unless there's a problem.
Generally, that's true. Yeah. Sometimes the banks want you to explain something a little further. Maybe I didn't explain it right in my report, or they missed where it was in the report. So, every now and then I'll get a revision request,
Sure.
which will be cool.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate a second set of eyes on it.
Mhm.
But yeah, normally, unless there's a professional reconsideration of value, I don't normally hear about it anymore.
Professional reconsideration of value. That sounds like a fancy
ROV.
That sounds like a fancy way to say appeal. Is that an appeal?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, good. We'll talk
I'm
about
just trying
this.
to make it sound good.
It does sound good though.
Yeah.
This is really fancy. I love
Thank
it. So let's zoom in on the walkthrough itself, because that's where my sellers can get involved a little bit. First of all, do you care if the seller is there?
I personally don't.
Okay. All right.
That may change with some appraisers may, but I don't think most do.
Okay. I thought you were going to say it depends on if they're a jerk or not. If they're a jerk,
well,
anyway, so what are some things, like what should sellers expect during the walkthrough? Like, so they're there, maybe they work from home, or maybe they just happen to be off that day and they're hanging out at the property. Well, you just drive up, and then what happens? You start walking around outside, inside, knock on the door. What happens?
yeah, I knock on the door and I'll, introduce myself, give them a card, and then explain the process. I usually like to walk through the home one time, take photos, notes on finishes, anything that would affect value, condition, anything like that, upgrades. So I walk through once and do that. And then I usually walk through again and will measure. And I've been using Kubicasa for my measuring primarily for a couple of years.
What is that?
And it's an app that you can get on your phone that will measure a home to ANSI standards. And
so start with a C or a K?
Cubicasa. Yeah.
Okay. I will get a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So you do the quick walk, take some photos, then you do a measurement. Okay. Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Okay. And then I'll take photos of the outside, walk around the property. And then that's pretty much it for the inspection. And then I'll start driving through the neighborhood, taking pictures of comparable sales.
Sure.
And to be honest, it depends on the scope of work, the reason for the appraisal. Sometimes it's not really necessary to do that, but for banks it is. Banks expect us to drive the comps.
Yeah.
So I'll do that.
Okay. What about like crawl space, garage, attic, stuff like? Do you have to get into all those?
For FHA loans, you do or FHA appraisals. Yeah. Now the FHA has changed things, and to be honest with you, I haven't done a lot of FHA work in the last few years. But I believe that there is a change now that if the attic is blocked, the access is just difficult. You can't really get up there without a lot of work. That the appraiser can state that, I believe, and not have to go up in the attic.
So funny, and I hope he's listening. One of my builders, it's a USDA loan, so that may have been the wrinkle, but the builder said, there's no storage in the attic. I've got 24 inches of insulation up there, and I'm not putting a hole because I don't want cold air, hot air exchange. And my buyer's agent just went off the deep end along with the lender. It was like, nope, we got to have it. We got to
Oh
have it.
no.
We got to have it. And I wanted to hear it from the appraiser. They did not oblige my request, but that's okay. Anyway, I wanted to make sure that this was real before we turned the builder loose doing a rather expensive adaptation. So he ended up putting in an access in the
Yeah.
master closet, I think, I want to say. And it's nice. I mean, he did it right. He didn't just, do a spiteful. It's what I would have done. Cut a hole and say, there you go. But no, he didn't. He did it right. But I was just curious about this. This was where I had first heard the term head and shoulder inspection for
Yes,
USDA.
yeah.
So I'll have to look into that.
And I've appraised homes for FHA where there was similar situation. There was no scuttle, no drop stair, and I don't remember them requiring that one be cut in. I just told them there's no attic access, and that's it.
Yeah.
Now, if they did, maybe they did, and I just didn't hear about it.
Okay.
But so I don't know, and it might be a lender specific thing too.
It could be. I get that there's probably a lot of those variables, not just for
Yeah,
residential purchases, but like you said, I mean, there's a million banks and a million programs, and whoever's backing that investment gets a vote. So if they want it, then they want
they
it.
do.
So same with the crawl space. Like if there's no easy access to the crawl space, you just make a note. That's that.
With crawl spaces, I don't know about that for crawl spaces. I'm pretty sure we still have to crawl through and be able to see
Well,
all the aspects of the crawl space. Yeah, and then there has to be a certain crawl space height, and I can't remember what is off the top of
I
my
can
head. I
tell
always have to
you,
look it up.
I can tell you what it was in 2000 because my very first deal as a buyer's agent at Remax, it wasn't the first one to close. It was the very first property I ever had under contract. We did eventually close it, but it was a novel worthy story. But anyway, and we had our FHA at first, and then when the appraiser came and looked, he said it can't go FHA. He said because there's only like 9 inches of clearance in the crawl space. It has to be, at that time it was 18 inches. And he said,
That sounds
yeah,
right.
and that was 25 years ago. So who knows? But but I still remember her and her dog and all the conversations we had about that house. I mean, we did eventually get it closed. We went conventional, but still, yeah, that was my first dose of reality with the bank gets a big vote in that property. It's not just about value. There's a lot of, especially with FHA. So, but anyhow,
Yeah, and as appraisers, we have to follow. There's guidelines we have to follow for USPAP and any bank requirements. So if the bank says we have to do it, as long as it doesn't violate USPAP, we have
yeah,
to do it.
right.
So
So as far as timing goes, so once you're done, once you're out, well, I do have to ask. So are you influenced by baked goods?
I am not. I am not. But I love the smell.
Okay.
And it's a treat to walk through a house where there's a smell of chocolate chip cookies in the air.
What if they're
But no,
actual chocolate chip cookies laying out with a note that says appraiser and an arrow? What I mean,
I we I'll leave that up to the appraiser, but we cannot let it influence us in any
okay,
way.
all right. So okay, got
Yeah,
it. I was looking for some hints for my sellers to maybe improve their odds a little bit. I
can I
say
ask?
in my book, which was written well before I met you, I did say that appraisers are human and you should treat them like human beings when they come through your house. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, here's where this is, and here's how you turn the lights on in this room. And oh, by the way, here's some cookies. And how's your day? Maybe lock up the dogs. So
Yeah, that's always nice. I do appreciate that. Although dogs love me. I don't know what it is. I don't. It's like I've got a bag of bacon in me.
mhm.
So they just follow me around. But it's helpful if they're loving.
It is. I had the same luck with animals when I was showing houses. It just dogs didn't bother me, cats didn't bother me. I did have one angry cat one time that, and the owners were shocked when I talked to them later. They were like, "That cat is the nicest cat ever," and I had met the cat another time, But I came in, the owners weren't there. I was there with buyers, and the cat just decided today was not my day. So that was it. That's the only bad
Oh,
run-in I've had with an animal in the millions of
it was a
showings.
catastrophe.
Oh God. Catastrophe. Listeners would expect nothing less. This episode of Talking Realty is brought to you by our friends over at Associates Title. This team is shaking things up by focusing on what truly matters, putting the customer first. Whether you're buying, selling, investing, for sale by owner, or working with a realtor, they've got your back with incredible cost savings and the latest technology to streamline the entire process. Their secure online portal keeps everyone in the loop, from buyers and sellers to lenders and agents, all while keeping your data safe and your communications crystal clear. If you're getting ready to sell, don't underestimate the importance of having a great title company in your corner. Check them out today at associatestitleinc.com or call my friend Ryan Phillips at 614-419-2418. Check the show notes for those links and information. Do not leave your title company choice to chance. Now, back to the podcast. Okay, so from beginning to end, just ballpark, are we talking from the time you get the order, days, weeks? I mean, roughly with a residential
Usually,
purchase?
yeah, usually 3 to 4 business days after I see the property. It's pretty standard. Some go so fast. There's all sorts of comparable sales, tons of data. I call the agents, they call me right back, and I can get it back within a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
There are other times when it's a really unique property, and it sometimes it just takes. I've had appraisals take weeks
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're digging into it and you're waiting for people to call you back, and so. But most of the time, 3 to 4 business days.
So you mentioned the purpose of the appraisal. Does this influence the value pretty heavily, or is it just something you need to know?
The purpose of the appraisal can influence the scope of work, which in some cases may impact value to some degree. But generally speaking, an appraisal is an appraisal. If you think about it, if somebody is getting a loan on a home
Mm-hmm.
and they hire an appraiser's appraising the market value, it's market value, right? And if someone's getting a divorce and they need to know the market value, it's not like suddenly the market value changes. The market could care less what's happening. They
Mm-hmm.
market value is what it is. So the way we develop market value is generally the same.
Okay. I mean, that's kind of that whole arm's length thing. Like I know that's a different term for a different purpose, but the point is this is supposed to happen sort of in a vacuum from the situation. It's more like you said, it's an opinion of a supportable opinion of market value, meaning that it doesn't matter if it's for a divorce or for an estate or if it's for a residential home sale, that it is what it is.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
fair enough.
That's it.
So to that end, do things like the list price, does that affect your opinion or does it get your attention and somehow factor in if it sells way above or way below the list price?
It does. We do have to consider that. We have to consider the listing time. We really report in our appraisal report our analysis of that because it is an indication of market value. However, there are times where a home sells quickly
Mm-hmm.
and it appraised over the list price because someone just got a good deal. Someone was just looking to get rid of the property for one reason or another. But we have to be able to explain all of that. There has to be some rationale for that kind of a thing. So, but these are data points we have to consider
Okay.
in the appraisal
I
process.
understand. And so, say a property that's for sale by owner that doesn't get more than, say, a sign and maybe a Facebook posting, could that be one of those explanations as to maybe why it was on the market for maybe a very long time, or for why it sold for wildly different than what it was listed for?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, homes that are listed with real estate agents typically sell for more. They're exposed to a bigger
Yeah.
market area. You've got a professional with expertise helping you out. So typically they do sell for more. Not always, but
Not always.
I think typically they do.
Well, we liken it to internally, because one of our services, we do things a little differently here. We're not the typical traditional realtor company. We do all the same things. We just do it we do a variety of things for a variety of fees. So we use what we call a menu of services. So For example, if someone comes to us and they say, Glenn, I only want MLS exposure, we have a package for that. It's a few $100s, and we put them in and we bounce everybody over to them. No, this is not a naked commercial for the Ohio Property Group, although that comes later. There is one of those. But anyway, so, and our rationale for that is that, look, you may have a perfectly priced property. It might be completely prepped wonderfully, and the perfect buyer's out there. They just have no idea that you're out there, because you're not on the 200 or so buyer websites that they're scouring for, including the big ones, Realtor, Zillow, Redfin, homes.com, places like that. And you can't get on those websites without realtor access. And so to your point, if they are marketing it outside of the MLS, that could be a real deterrent or a real downward pressure on the price, because it's like an auction. If you have an auction with two people or one person, it's not going to be a very good auction. But if there's, say, 500 people there and deals are starting to happen, okay, well then now we're going to maximize value at that point. So anyway, I digress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so those things do matter. What about, is it a problem to dig down a little bit on that, if the list price, for whatever reason, we came in low and a bunch of people saw it as a value, and maybe it was a little bit inventory starved area, who knows, lots and lots of factors, and all of a sudden this sucker takes off and now we're 5-10% over list price. Is that a problem for you?
Not if there's market data to support that.
Such
I mean,
as,
this was happening a lot during the pandemic. Closed sales that are comparable. There has to be market support for that.
Yeah.
So, but it was happening, during the pandemic. A lot of times, a lot of homes were getting bid up, but then we look at the sales and we apply the market change adjustments to those sales, and sure enough, it was right in there. So not always, though. There were times where it just got bid up way beyond what the market would really support. And that's when us appraisers are hated.
Well, and you shouldn't be, because, sellers need to be aware that in those types of markets, it is a tactic of buyers and agents to do this, to go crazy, to win the bid, so to speak, to win the offer. And then either during appraisal or inspections, more than likely, we're going to bring this sucker back down to earth. Yeah. But now I've got it locked up. All the other buyers have cleared out. So I've got you to myself, Mr. Seller, so I can take advantage of that situation, get the price down. I've been on multiple rants about this particular tactic, just to beware, seller beware, it's called. Okay, so if there is no contract, there is no list price. In the case of an estate or divorce, does that make it more difficult, or same process?
Not to me, same process. On a purchase where there is a contract, that's a data point that shows market support at that price. So, that in some respects that can be easier, but we still can't just match it. We still have to develop the process the same, and, hopefully that contract is reflected in the market. But if it's probate or divorce or any other purpose, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Process is the thing.
We have a series of office truths, about 20 of them at last count. And then truth number one is the market never lies, not ever. And have you found that to be correct? Or would you say sometimes, in other words, the way I apply this is, one, if it's not selling, but by the way, truth number two, if it's not selling, it's overpriced. So there's that. And then, but if it is selling, it's probably priced correctly. And if we get a buyer and seller to agree on a particular price, is that not the essence of market value? In other words, well, how could that be wrong? Help me out, Jamie. How could that be wrong?
Yeah. I get that. I get the thinking. It is more complex than that, though, because if you just go by that, a seller and a buyer agree upon a price, and that's the market value. Well, what if they agreed upon a price that was 50,000 under market? Is that market value because they agreed upon that price? So the same principle applies if it's 50,000 over market value, right? Market's made up of just more than just two people. It's made up of a market,
right?
Probably hundreds or thousands of people, and we're looking for the most probable sales price, not the highest probable sales price or the lowest possible sales price. It's the most probable sales price. So, but truthfully, generally, you put a house on the market, you get interest in it. It goes under contract. I think most of the time the appraisers land in pretty close to the contract price.
Yeah, they do.
Of course, sometimes when that happens, then we're looking like we're making that a target, right? And so either way, we're
I'm so glad you're
you know what,
here.
if we do it, we're so it's if we come in at the purchase price, we're hitting the target. If we don't, we're not doing our job. So
Uh,
I don't even worry about that kind of thing.
and you
I
almost
just do my
can't. I don't
job
see
and
how
worry
you
about it.
could because it would
No,
drive you nuts. I mean,
yeah,
you don't want to be the hated person in the process, and I'm sure you are at times. But
yeah.
this is why we don't publish your home address.
Bless your heart.
No problem.
But I will say this. I think that most people, if an appraiser does a good job of explaining how they got to the number, like I've got attorneys, one attorney gave me the best compliment. She said, I got your report and I do not like your number, but I saw exactly how you got to it.
Yeah.
And that was like a huge compliment
Mhm.
because this is it. I mean, take it or leave it, but at least you see how we got to the number and it makes sense. It's logical. Don't have to agree with it.
No, and and I'm off, naturally on many cases when I'm say not very happy with the appraiser, it's for obvious reasons. We had a number and they didn't agree, and now it's a problem. But that's
Yes.
okay. We
Yeah.
get paid to deal with problems, so I'm all good with that. I'm looking for edges here, though. Okay, so is it all about value? Is it all about what's around it and what's selling, or are there other? I know there are literally dozens and dozens of factors, but what are the biggies? Is it, you know, when you're talking about comp sales, certainly no two houses, unless they're in a PUD unit or something, they're not going to be identical. Most of the time, they're not going to be identical, not in Ohio anyway.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
are there factors that have more influence than others, such as age, square footage, bedrooms? Are those at the top of the list and the others are sort of influencers, or are they all equal?
They're definitely not equal. In fact, interestingly, if you look at the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac 1004 form, standard, the the order of importance of value influence is basically the order that the data is in those grids. So it starts with location, right? Location, location, location. That's an important one. Maybe one of the most important.
Sure.
And then lot size, external influences, and then age. Of course, age and condition can kind of morph together depending on the age of the property. If it's a new property, age, yes. If it's an older property, but it's been renovated, you get into all that. So, but age and condition, gross living area, bedroom count, actually bedroom, bathroom count, that's next. Gross living area, basements. And then at the very bottom, you got, fireplaces, porches, patios, decks. And sometimes those impact value, but generally it's not enormous.
We always joke about the gold-plated toilet seats and the really important upgrades. I mean, these of course carry a lot of weight with you, right? It's important for you to know these things.
Well, it depends.
It does not depend. So we'll get, because we do a market analysis before we list. It's included with certain packages of ours, and
Mhm.
we've learned over the many years and many dents in my forehead that a seller is going to tell you what they think, and we love. Honestly, we encourage control freak sellers to come our way because we like engaged and sometimes really engaged sellers in the process. It makes for a better process, at least from my end. But anyway, sometimes I will say, hey, here's what I think it's going to sell for. And then I give them a separate section that says, here's what I think you're going to run into from an appraisal perspective, because, to your point, things are moving. So many sellers disagree with me if I don't agree with them. So, and then we'll usually point to something like that, like, oh, well, we put in the best lighting you could find. And I don't see that calculated in here anywhere. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
how do I answer that question? This is more therapy for me, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure. Well, there has to be market support for that conclusion, and buyers are different. Some buyers may agree and be willing to pay a little bit more for something, and other buyers may care less.
Right.
So, and the trick is trying to figure out what the majority are going to do. And sometimes that's just the market's just not that precise.
Right. Well, and those things, to your point, there may be a buyer that walks in and goes, oh my gosh, this is the European 475 model. and they're all about it, but 99% of buyers are not even going to notice.
Yeah,
So,
that's the thing. And if there's no demand, then there's no value.
oh man, that could be truth 21. No demand equals no value. I love it. Okay. Yeah, that's going to end up somewhere. Okay. We talked a little bit about basements. I have several basement questions. You talk about
I bet you
gross
do.
living area. Gross living area is
Yeah.
defined as what?
Finished and heated above grade area, the suitable for all year round use, and it has to be above grade,
Why?
completely above
Do you
grade.
know why?
That's just the standard that has been out there. To be honest, I mean it's ANSI standards, but before ANSI, for Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, FHA, this has been the guidelines for as long as I can remember appraising. So it's not, but it seems like a lot of people don't read the selling guide because it's enormous, like Fannie or the FHA, 1004 one.
Right.
So, but it's in there. It's just a standard. It's just a standard.
So,
But we're appraising the market value, not ANSI standard. So we have to figure out what the market's paying.
which is the
Yeah.
next? I mean, that's naturally the lead in because you see these properties that are set in a hill, the back of the basement's underground, but yet you've got these massive windows and walkout doors. My sister, for years, lived in a home on a lake that was set into a hill. The bottom floor was nicer than just about every apartment I ever lived in growing up. It was gorgeous and it was all glass. Like it felt like part of the exterior, but not usable as above ground square footage. So obviously you and I were not in on that meeting when they made this decision 100 years ago, right?
No, but I will say this: things like that. Like, remember we were talking, and I was saying there are some weird circumstances where you
Yes.
might be able to include that. That's one of them, like a berm home, a home on a mountainside. There are times when Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac will allow you to count that lower level. But here's the caveat: you've got to be able to demonstrate the market that's
Right.
how the market's viewing it,
Yes.
and then you don't get a basement. You can't count it as a basement and living area. So
So the
pick your
old
poison. Do you?
what's the remember the raised ranch where you walk in
Yeah,
and then immediately you've got to make a choice. You can go up or you can go down,
yeah,
right? Those split
exactly.
levels or split ranch, raised ranch. Yeah, I mean, so same thing. We would get those listed. We still get them listed today, and they want to count, say, 2,200 square feet, and I know it's not 20. It's 1,100 and 1,100, and then they want to tell me they have a finished basement. You're saying no bueno.
Nope, exactly.
Got
You're
it.
double dipping.
You're double dipping.
Yeah. Now there is value for having a basement. So if I'm appraising a buy level, there's above grade finished square footage and below grade, but there's value in having the basement, and then there's additional value for parts that are finished.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're not getting the value. It's
Right.
just it's hard for people to get their head
Well,
around.
and this kind of is the nexus of this whole episode is for me is when because some MLSs because since we're statewide, we have different rules depending on which county we're in. So some
Mhm.
MLSs, say in your area, Northeast, that MLS allows us to control what goes into the above and below grade square footage number, right? If we can defend it and
Yeah.
we can demonstrate that it's correct, then we're good. And if we get audited and we can't defend it, then that's a problem. We could get fined, we could get, all kinds of bad stuff. But we're grown-ups. They treat us like grown-ups. Others, you can tell where I fall on this, where my opinion is. Others have that field locked into whatever is at the auditor or on realist. We can't touch it. So if the
Oh wow.
seller did finish the basement after they bought it, or did an addition, or it's just wrong, there's a process. We'll say there's just a process, and it's not fun in most cases to getting it changed. Some of those processes involve calling a guy like you and having you come out and say that we're not wrong.
Measure
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So in those cases where the seller's really been out of shape is, hey, the guy down the street's got the same house as me, but he's showing way more square footage, and I know he doesn't have it. Like that puts me in a pickle, especially if I can't control it. So at that point, do you do these things? Do you do come out and measure for people and not appraise or
Mhm.
not?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Really?
I do. I'm doing one tomorrow. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep.
Your menu of services, is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Exactly.
I wouldn't
And
have
that's
to
it.
go
The value.
I wouldn't have to go through a bank to get you. I could just call you up.
Mm-mm.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
wow.
And you know what I've been using the Kubicasa for, because the cool thing about it is it gives you a floor plan too. And honestly, not that I like turning away business, but I've been telling agents, like, I'll go ahead and do it for you, and I'll use Kubicasa unless you want me to use a laser. I can use a laser, no problem if you specify. But the nice thing with Kubicasa is you get a nice floor plan, and it's pretty detailed, and it's very inexpensive to use. So I tell the realtors, just take the sign up. There's no monthly fee. Scan the property, and it's been very accurate from.
Excellent. Okay.
So yeah, and the gross living area report measures to ANSI standards, which is what we use, and it's $15
For the report.
for the GLA report.
That's
If you
awesome.
want to just use it for the floor plan, it's free.
Wow.
The floor plans are free,
That's
so you can just scan
outstanding.
it, and it's a cool tool.
Well, we'll definitely link to it because it sounds fascinating. I can't believe I haven't run into it yet. But regardless,
Me too.
so back to your earlier point, just because we can't count it as above grade square footage or GLA doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Doesn't mean
Exactly.
and I don't know a buyer that's going to go, wow, that place is everything I want, but it only has blah 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 square footage. I'm not even going to go look. We just don't see that in the buyer world. They know
No.
what they're doing for the most part. They can drive by it or they can check it out online and go, yeah, look at all these living areas I could have. Okay, so definitely they're getting credit, just not the way they want.
Correct. Yeah.
What do you do with bonus rooms and stuff like that? Same deal. I mean, like if it's over a garage or something like that, doesn't matter.
It doesn't, as long as it's attached to the rest of the house, with like a hint of heated and finished hallway or stairway. If you get a bonus room over a garage, but you've got to go into the garage,
Oh,
and then up the
right.
stairs, then there's value there, but it wouldn't be considered gross living
Yeah,
area
that's an
value. It'd
apartment.
be
That's a
so. Yeah,
yeah. That's something different. But like to your point, it's still
different.
valuable. It still has demand.
Yeah,
People would love something a cool feature like that. Okay.
absolutely.
Earlier, you mentioned the unicorn house, or maybe you didn't, but that's where you were headed. Is the house that is just like what is this thing? It's not like anything else around it. Certainly, what do you do? You're not going to find comparable sales, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because sometimes there are no comparable sales. So I will look for something that is just as odd that a buyer would consider in replacement of that one. Because sometimes if a buyer's looking at this really strange property, that may be the kind of property that just appeals to them.
Mm.
And so if I can find another strange property, I'll use it. And I try to bracket the different components of value, square footage, acreage, to the best of my ability. The other thing is I'll go back in time 4 or 5 years, because sometimes there is a comparable sale out there, but it's sold 4 or 5 years ago, and I can easily make a market change adjustment. We can measure the market price change, um, and bring those values current. So I'll do that too. And then the other thing I can do is, widen my scope of work
Mm.
to other market areas that I think a buyer would be interested in place of that area
Understood.
that they would consider.
But it's a
So yeah,
problem.
it's hard. Yeah, and I get a lot of them, to be honest with you.
You start charging more for them. But anyway,
I actually, that's what my wife tells me.
yeah, your wife's not wrong. Most home sellers dread inspection and appraisal issues. Our digital course, Living to Listing, teaches you how to turn any property into the perfect listing. So you sail through inspections, sail through appraisals, and sell faster and for more money. In Living to Listing, you'll get dozens of checklists, tools, and walkthrough videos from yours truly for every step. And here's my promise: if this course doesn't meet your high standards, just let me know. Not only will I refund you, I'll let you keep the course. Just doesn't get any better than that. You literally have nothing to lose. Check out the free videos at livingtolisting.com. Let me know what you think. Now, back to the podcast. So, what about the life cycle of mechanical items? We get this question a lot, new roof versus old roof. Does the market have, like, are you able to track that really or not really? Or is it one of those
It
lower
it is
value things?
it's it really does depend. I've had properties I've appraised with a new roof, and I found some sales with new roofs, and it made a difference.
Okay.
It's usually not dollar for dollar, though, to be honest with you, but sometimes it makes a difference. I've had other cases. I did a litigation case last year. I had a new roof, made no difference. I found comparable sales that were really similar. Some had a new roof, some didn't. Zero difference.
Huh.
So we have to really dig in, and you would think, yeah, $20,000, $30,000 roof, that make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it doesn't. So, and then does the roof have 15 years left, or is it healing and it looks like it's going to give way any day? That's something to
But
consider.
that would be
That could
more of
probably
a
have a big
condition
impact.
too, right? Like that would get into
Right. Yeah.
like, hey, this is a problem. And
Exactly.
the lender
Exactly.
may or may not have a problem with that. Is that accurate?
Right. Right.
Depending on like if
That's
it's
correct.
FHA, we know they're going to have a problem with it. But conventional, do they have a problem with a roof that's, one
Just
toe
old.
in the grave? Yeah.
Not. I think it's 3 years of useful life left, I believe is what it
Okay.
was. Don't
Yeah.
quote me on that,
Yeah.
but I think it was like 3 years of useful life left. So and if there's missing shingles, an appraiser may call for a roof certification because we're not roofers. So just to make sure that it's intact. So sometimes I'll do that,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's for a lender or some other purpose. So yeah, so roofs make a difference sometimes. Furnaces, hot water tanks. It's hard to make an adjustment for something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think the market's really that precise on some of that.
And I don't see how it could be because we don't track that. It's not like
Right,
somewhere in
exactly.
a database that says the water heater is gas and it's a GE blah 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 high efficiency and it was installed 2 years ago. We just don't have that kind of data. So
And that might be it.
from a value perspective, does FHA, VA, conventional, do they use the same math? I mean, should it matter if I'm a lender or if I'm a seller and I've got two offers and everything's the same except one's FHA and one's VA? From a value point of view, should it matter or does it matter?
It really shouldn't. Market value is market value. But the only thing is that with FHA, they have their minimum property standards that need to be met. And so there are certain repairs that you'd have to make, the appraiser would have to make the report subject to being resolved. Whereas a conventional loan, they may let you just make an adjustment for it,
Okay.
for the market impact.
Okay.
So, as is versus subject to. So there could be a value difference, but if all things are equal, other than that, the value should be the same
Oh,
for FHA, VA.
but from where you sit, it's not necessarily like, because some sellers are convinced that if they take an FHA buyer that they're going to struggle with the appraisal, not from because it's what's weird is it's not usually the lower end properties, it's the higher end. I don't know why, but if I'm sitting on a $400,000 or $500,000 house that's 3 years old, odds are I'm not going to have an appraisal issue from a value or from
Right.
a condition
Right.
perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very unlikely. I mean, maybe it's a new home and they didn't put rails on and it's
Something like
the
that.
appraiser views as a safety issue. Yeah, but yeah, that'd be rare.
Piece of cake. That's a
Yep. Yeah.
Saturday morning project. We could have that done.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
from a value perspective, there shouldn't be any like wide variance from these one program to the next in terms of the appraiser's opinion of value.
There really shouldn't.
Okay.
No.
Does appraisal gap coverage affect your opinion of value if you are aware that it's there or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it does not. But I get that question a lot, and I can see why. I think some people might feel like, okay, there's an appraisal gap, so they're going to be a little more conservative and maybe come in under market value because it's safe to do so, and not ruffle any feathers. But I don't think for most professional appraisers that's going to be an issue. It's not for me.
Okay.
So whatever it is, it is. And the gap's great. I can see why you use it. I think it's a nice tool in the market we've been
Well,
having for the last few
I
years.
can't speak for all realtors. I can just tell you that when the only time I even bring it up is when the buyer pushes us over list price in a multiple offer situation. And I just go back and say, what kind of appraisal gap coverage are you willing to offer? Because I don't represent buyers. I only represent sellers. And so for me, I'm just curious. That's all, right. I mean, yes, I want it. I'm not even saying it's a deal breaker or it isn't a deal breaker. I'll let their imaginations run wild with that. In some cases, it is a deal breaker. I'll have a seller say, I'm not doing this unless they offer me X dollars. So you're saying, though, from an appraiser's point of view, it's not really a factor.
It really isn't. No, no. I mean, no,
I will tell you, a
not in any way.
lot of lenders disagree with you, because I've heard this, like you said, I've heard this from more than one lender who's been like, do not put it on a separate addendum. Don't put it in the contract. Like, bury it.
Hmm.
And it's uncomfortable, to be honest. I'm not. Is that a problem? Is that a problem? If there are parts of the deal you don't know about?
Well, we have to analyze the contract, and it would be nice if we got the whole contract to analyze. If you take it out of the contract and we don't know about it, there's not much we can do about it.
Right.
But if it's in the contract, I don't think it's going to have any impact. And I don't know, maybe they've got some data that I don't know. I can only speak for myself,
Mm-hmm.
but for me, it makes no difference. And I get, someone may love a house and they are willing to pay more than market value
Mm-hmm.
for it. But the bank also has to protect their assets, and that's what their viewpoint is. If this forecloses, they need to have a solid number.
Fair enough.
But
no, you're not wrong about that. So since we're on contract terms, there's a couple others I want to ask you about. I mean, right now we're seeing an uptick in seller concessions, and we'll talk about why here in a little bit. I'm sure you already know, but we're seeing sort of an uptick in seller concessions. And for the uninitiated, that just means that if you're selling a house for $200,000, but you have $5,000 in closing costs as a buyer that you do not wish to out of pocket, either because you can't or you just don't want to, assuming it will appraise, you can bump that price to 205 and ask for $5,000 back in seller concessions to you to help offset your cash at closing. Okay. So you see it, it's in the contract. Does that change anything for you?
not as far as the contract and the subject property. Like, we don't adjust for the seller concessions of the subject property, but we will adjust for the seller concessions. But this is where it gets fun. We do adjust for the concessions of the comparable sales because we have to go by cash equivalency, right? If you're paying cash, why would the seller, say, here's 5,000. Thank you for buying my house. I'm going to give you 5,000 back if you're paying cash, right? Why would they do that?
I don't know. I mean, I know why they do it, but the seller's not actually giving them the money. Just so people understand, seller concessions, that is a total misnomer. Not one seller in the world has ever come to me and said, you know what, I want to sell my house for $200,000, but I really feel generous. I would like to give that buyer an extra 5G at closing just because I'm a nice person. Doesn't happen. It literally never happens like that. It's always because the buyer is trying to finance certain costs. So what's interesting to me is, number one, you can use them. You don't worry about them if it's on the subject property. You don't even think about it, right? Because you got to hit that 205. You have to hit it.
Well,
you don't have to, but
no, we don't have to.
No,
but no, I mean, we report that there's seller concessions. We report that.
Sure.
But on the sales comparison grade, we don't adjust for the seller concessions of the subject property.
Right.
We just adjust.
No breaks. There's no break for that. But if you find a comp that also sold last week for 205 and had 5,000 in concessions, you can't count it as being 205.
Correct. It would
crazy.
We would report that it sells for 205, but then we have to adjust out the $5,000 because, to your point, it's all about financing. If they were paying in cash, there wouldn't be that seller concession. That's the whole point. And the definition of market value that we use is it's based on cash equivalency.
Right.
So,
well, presumably, if it did close, somebody thought it was worth 205. That's the crazy part, because it had to appraise for 205, more than likely, unless it was like you said. But we don't get seller concessions on cash deals, because why would I pay you 205 cash only to have you give me 5,000 of my money back to me? No, Doesn't happen.
Exactly. Yeah, it would
That's
be a
not how it works.
futile exercise in
Is
insanity.
we're in deep catch-22 land here right now. The things are getting, it's like an
I
Escher
know.
drawing or something. It's really strange.
Awkward.
so okay, I will get off of this but I got to say my head just turns to smoke when I think, I just can't get my head around it. Okay, well, let's move on. What about commissions? Now that commissions are being like just completely spelled out, because in the past they typically were not spelled out for you, does that affect your opinion of value?
Not that I've seen thus far. We are tracking it. It's pretty early in the process. I do call agents and try to verify sales, and I'll lately I've been asking them, if the home that I'm using as a comparable sold after August 15th, if the structure of the commissions is having an impact on that contract price. Thus far, the answer has been no, or they won't say. So,
No,
but I'm not seeing it right now.
I mean, we've closed a lot of deals since August 17th and negotiated even more. And in the beginning, we saw a lot of concessions in place of commissions. And then they just,
Mm.
after like 2 weeks of fiddle faddling around with concessions as commissions, and it got weird because there are caps for a lot of loan programs. There are caps on how much money the seller can, quote unquote, give back to the buyer at closing, but there are no caps on commissions. And if you
Hmm.
use concessions in place of commissions. I'm so sorry about this. This is very confusing, folks. We'll move on because this is just getting too deep in the weeds. But there can be problems. So a lot of agents just went back to just calling it a commission. Most of the board forms now are updating to have a separate section that just says whether or not there are commissions, how much they are, who's paying them. I mean, so it's all coming back to, and in my opinion, that's where it belongs. It belongs in the deal.
Yeah.
You know, it's a major financial term, and yet is for 100 years it's been negotiated completely outside of the parties. It just makes no sense to me. Anyway, off my soapbox, back to
It,
normal. Go ahead.
and we're in a buyer's market in most parts of a seller's market.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, seller's market in most parts of the country. Now, if there was a heavy shift towards it being a buyer's market, well, maybe that would change. I don't
it
know.
would.
We don't know.
It
But
would,
probably.
because now all of a sudden the pressure is on the seller. Right now the pressure is on the buyer. We've seen some pretty substantial deals come down the pike where the seller has just said, "No, I'm not paying anything. This is my net. This is what I want." Now, if you want to bump your price up and throw your agent a bone, that's fine. But it's got nothing. It better appraise because I don't care. And
Yes.
shockingly, deals are still coming together. How about that? Because everybody
Oh,
finds a way. I know it's the
yeah,
dust is
exactly.
settling. It's going to be fine. The world did not stop turning. So, as far as adjustments, we talked a little bit about this. Is there like a, I know there's you mentioned this 1004 form gives you sort of a hierarchy of what's important. Is there a standard blue book of value for a bathroom, an extra bathroom, or if a house is missing a bedroom versus a perfect comp, roughly the same layout, but one's a 3 and one's a 4? Like, does that exist, or do you have to do the math?
No, we have to do the math, and we have to do it every time because it's different for every house. It's never just a standard price per square foot or value per bathroom. Every house is specific. So on every appraisal, I've got to pull it all from the market, and it's a lot of work.
Oh,
Well, sometimes it's easy, but usually it's a lot of work, to 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 support it well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you were a walking billboard for becoming an appraiser early on. It is, the dew is coming off this. I just want you to know that, especially if
Well,
people
thank
are
you.
not math oriented. They're like, math is hard. I love math. It's not hard. Okay. So, but are there
No,
are
there's tools.
there software tools out there to help
Mhm.
you do some of these things besides Microsoft
Yeah.
Excel, or is that pretty much?
Oh yeah.
Oh, there are.
Oh yeah. No, there's the two that I use, and there's a number of them out there that are excellent. I use Solomon Adjustment, which is it uses depreciated cost. So you'll plug in the effective age, which we have to develop, and I use the age life method. So you've got to figure out the depreciation. You plug in the zip code, and then it will apply the depreciation to the price new or the cost new, and that's one system I use. And it also has some other cool features for like sensitivity analysis, forecasting. That's all in there.
Oh,
And then I also use Spark for appraisers. It's like Synapse. And that's a great program too. And it's robust. And I use that pretty much on every appraisal, those two.
So they can help you.
Yeah, it definitely speeds things up. It used to be like with the depreciated cost, you get the depreciation, then you got to go to Marshall and Swift. You got to figure out what the cost per square foot is, apply the depreciation, and it took a lot longer. Now it's very quick. Once you get the effective age, the how much the property is depreciated, not the property, but the improvements on the property,
Mm.
it does help a lot.
Okay.
It's awesome.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned being able to, in certain circumstances, go back quite a ways. I always thought kind of 6 months was the, ooh, let's not pass 6 months. I mean, you do you kind of start with the most recent and work your way back until you find what you need, or do you have a cutoff that's like, no, it's too old?
Well, for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the first three sales have sold within the last year.
Okay.
But there are times where those three sales are terrible, but they were the best I could find. But there was a great comp that sold, 18 months ago or 2 years ago, and it's a unique property or whatever the case is, and I'll throw that in as a fourth comparable sale, but I'll give it the most weight, because you'll adjust things out and it just makes sense. So there's that.
Cool.
Yeah. But but I do try to find the most comparable that have sold most recently. I mean, ideally,
Mhm.
that's what we're looking for.
Same with distance, then you kind of, they have a guideline that says you need to be within X number of miles or whatever of the subject, but,
Uh,
or not really.
some lenders years ago did have, if it's urban, you've got to be within a mile, or if it's suburban, 2 miles, things like that. I don't think those really exist anymore, but you've got to apply some logic. If you're in a medium density area, suburb, you may have to go out a couple of miles. That's still considered the market area. Buyers are still looking at that as the same neighborhood. But if you're in the city in a really high density area and there's a lot of sales, why would you go out over a mile? Sometimes even a half mile wouldn't make sense. You've got sales blocks away that are comparable. And then if it's rural, really low density, you might be driving, 15 miles to find a comparable sale. We want to get the closest we can find, but as far as a specific distance, I don't think that's really a guideline anymore with most banks. They want the closest.
Well, that's excellent news. That's good to know, though, as far as rules of thumb, that you closer is better. But like you said, if the perfect comp happens to be a little further away and a little older, and we can make it make sense, then we throw it in, give it some weight. As long as you're not skipping over three perfect comps just to get the really weird one that you want because it's higher
Right.
or lower or whatever you're trying to do. So I got it. I got you. A little common
Yeah.
sense. Sounds like there's a lot of common sense involved in what you do.
They're supposed to be. Generally, yeah.
Are there
Yeah.
are there any non-negotiables, like things, is it school district or a certain age versus another certain age or a certain lot type? Is there anything, or can you adjust if it makes sense? Can you adjust, or is there some rule that just like, no, you can't do that?
None that I can really think of. I mean, like highest and best use,
Mhm.
you know, that's one. If the subject and a sale have a different highest and best use,
Mhm.
then it's probably not a comp.
I gotcha.
So, so something like that's important. School district, it can be important. It's not a you can't. It's not that you can't use a sale in a different school district. If there are no comparables in that school district, and you're trying to find the most recent or the best comp out there. But I try not to leave the school district, especially if it's a higher density area. We've got an area where it's the same city, but two different school districts, and there's a huge value difference. And on paper, it may not look like it, but when you start digging into the math, there's definitely a difference. So ideally, I would never use a comparable sale from a school district outside of that one. I'd rather go back in time.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, so years ago, I had a condo for sale. It was part of a 4-unit condo building, I think, and they were all townhouses. So it was a big, wide building with 2-story units, 4 of them. But it was honestly the only condo development for, I don't know, 3 miles, 4 miles. And we were having a terrible time because the other three had not sold. And so now I'm out here trying to pull value out using single families as this is the best I can do. Can you do that if you're in a really weirdo situation or not?
Not really. No, a single family home. There's just a different. There's different rights. You start getting into like a condominium versus a single family home, and that's something I would definitely not do. I don't think any
What
appraiser
would
would
you
do.
do? I mean, if it's this lone wolf condo thing sitting out here surrounded by non condos.
So it's loan condo, and you said there was condos for sale, but they hadn't sold yet.
No, it was an
Or
older
no?
unit, but they hadn't turned over I couldn't find any sales in that building. They were built, moved into, and this was to my knowledge, the first one that was turning over, but it had been years.
Oh
It's not
wow.
like they were, 2 years old or something.
Okay. Yeah, in a case like that, I would try to find the next closest condo in a market that was relatively similar. And what I would do is maybe even ask agents based on your experience, if someone couldn't buy that condo, where would they go to look for a condo?
Hmm.
What market would they go in?
Gotcha.
And then I'd look in that market to see.
Okay. Oh, that's
Yeah,
fair.
those are tough.
We did end up
It's
selling it,
subjective.
and fortunately, the buyer was putting 20% down, so the appraisal was waived. And that's not an automatic. I'm not saying, for those listening, I'm not saying if you put 20% down, there's no appraisal. Very often, if there's a waiver, it's because the buyer was really strong and maybe they had a great
Yeah,
relationship with the bank and they were putting a ton of money down. So, but anyway, in this case, we
yeah,
didn't have
that
to,
makes sense.
because selling it, like we talked about earlier, selling it is the first hurdle. It's getting it appraised when you can't find comps. So, okay. So,
Makes it tough.
so is there any specific tips for sellers to maximize their home appraised value? I know you can't renovate, 30 seconds before the appraisal, but is there are there any things a seller could do before that walkthrough that would help their case at all?
Right before the walkthrough, there could be little repairs here and there that are needed, but at that point,
Ship has sailed.
yeah, basically, yeah. I don't think there's much you could do. And some people will really clean their home up nice, or they're freaked out because it's lived in. That kind of thing
You don't care.
doesn't usually make a
No.
difference. No, we're looking at walls, finishes. We're envisioning if they're moved out, what is it going to look like? The only time that makes a difference is if it's so cluttered that it's actually beginning to affect the finishes.
Mhm.
That could be a problem.
Yeah. We strongly encourage a thorough decluttering before they go on the market. Not everybody listens, but still, because that will impact the sales value, not necessarily the appraised, but definitely the sales value. So, what about things like documentation? Is I've got some sellers who are hyper organized. I give you, a folder of everything they've ever done to that place.
I, it is helpful. Yeah, I love getting a list from the homeowner or the agent, with the improvements made to the property over the years. Even if it doesn't really have a specific impact on value, it builds the picture of the property and the history of the property, the story of it. And I find it helpful. And it helps me when I'm valuing that property.
Okay.
And if it's typed out nicely, sometimes I'll just scan it right into the report and say refer to the list that the homeowner gave me. If it's handwritten, I usually don't do that.
No.
I just type it in.
Okay. Interesting. As many of you know, we don't run paid ads for our real estate company or for this podcast. We rely on good old-fashioned people talking to people, word of mouth. So, if you find any of this content useful, would you mind taking a few seconds, give it a rating, a thumbs up if you're on video? And if you're feeling really generous, maybe even sketch out a review. I'd consider it a personal favor. Let's spread the word to other home sellers. Okay? Back to your regularly scheduled podcast. Is it arrogant to give you comps, or is that a mistake, or do they go straight in the trash, or because some sellers will leave comps. Some agents, I'm sure,
Yeah,
do too.
yeah, I like it. I'll tell you, usually the sales that they're giving me, I'm probably already considering, and I may or may not consider them comparable, but I've looked at them, I'm thinking about them. But sometimes someone give me a comp, they just know the sale that I missed, and it's in this folder, and it's like, oh man, this is awesome because it's a great comp. It's not about hitting a price. It's just, it's a great comp. It really reflects the market. And that kind of thing really helps me. But having said that, every appraiser is different. Some appraisers are not comfortable with that, but there's nothing wrong with you offering the appraiser the comps. Probably half will appreciate it and some don't.
Well, I mean, I've my thought was if they do it, if the seller does it, and the appraiser throws it in the trash, so what? I mean, it's not the. I mean, you're
Yeah,
not out
yeah.
anything.
No.
Permits, things like that. Does that matter? Permitted stuff. Do you guys look into that or no?
If there's an addition and there's no permit and it was an illegal, they put it up illegally, that can make a difference. But we don't pull permits. We don't look for permits on every single renovation.
Okay,
So
just curious.
yeah,
I got the
not
question.
permit.
So, right.
Yeah, good question.
I get the question. So, yeah. What about an old appraisal? Would that be of any use to you, or is it more decoration than anything else, unless it was recent?
Yeah, it's more decoration. To be honest, even if it was recent, I'll tell you the reason I look at them generally. It's terrible to say. I just like to know what my competition's doing. And sometimes I'll see the report like, man, that is a great report.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm like, oh man. But there are times where I'll read through it and there's something that is beneficial. But I've got to do my own research anyway, and I have to verify everything myself. So giving me an old report really doesn't help.
Okay. Save the paper. I'll tell them to save the paper.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned pre-sale appraisals. You do a fair number of these?
Not a lot, maybe one a month.
Okay.
So it's not a lot.
So
especially if it's a weird property.
I would call you up.
Strange.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the unicorn, that might be a good time to get it.
Exactly. I'm doing one right now. It's in a rural area. It's got an ADU detached from the main structure, and a greenhouse and an outbuilding, and there's just no great sales.
Can you break down ADU for us?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, accessory dwelling unit.
Right. Just be like
like
an
apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, those are actually. That's a whole other topic. We'll talk about that another day. So as far as getting an appraisal before the property goes for sale, what would be a good reason to get one other than you've got this weird property, you have no idea where to start? Are there other reasons? Like, does it carry any weight for the rest of, I mean, I guess I've answered my own question a little bit, because the realtor may or may not look at it. The buyer may or may not consider it. And the appraiser probably, like you said, is going to look for things he can steal for good ideas, not necessarily any data. So
yeah,
not a huge thing.
It's not a huge thing. No, I mean, and a bank is going to hire their own appraiser to come out. There have been times where, in a case like that, they had appraisal done. They gave it to me, and there was a comparable on there that I missed. So, similar to like an agent, that's like, oh, hey, that's actually a pretty good comp, and I didn't see that. So for that reason, that could benefit an appraiser if you had it done before.
Okay.
And the other thing is square footage. The appraiser is going to hopefully measure the property and report what they measure in the report, and hopefully it's to ANSI standards, or so that could help too, because maybe the property is a lot bigger or smaller than the homeowner realized.
I'm just thinking about my pain in the butt MLSs, a couple of them that make us get real documentation when the seller wants to change the square footage. This would be a great use case for it. So
there you go.
I could say, Jamie says it's right. Okay. Well, let's talk about the dirty elephant in the room, the low appraisal. Is this happening? I mean, I know you mentioned during COVID. Well, let me just back up. Do you see a lot of them?
Where the appraisal comes in below contract price? Not a lot. I mean, they do happen. So over the past few years, I've not done a ton of lending work, but I will say most of them have been in there, but some don't. Some don't come in at contract price. Just a lot of times they were bid up during the COVID. They got way bid up, and I just couldn't find any sales that would support that, even when you consider how fast prices were appreciating. So, it does happen,
So
but
you
doesn't
do
happen
look
often.
at that though. You do look at a crazy
Oh yeah.
market that's on fire or a market that's cratering for a factory goes out in a town and all of a sudden everybody's selling and then values are plummeting. You do look, you're able to calculate some of those things.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, especially price change. Competing sales and overall market price change. In fact, in '08, I was doing an appraisal. This was reverse mortgage appraisals,
Oh,
FHA, and yeah, and I was coming in. Well, my value opinion came in lower than they wanted, and I checked on my report that prices were in decline, and I made negative time adjustments. And the owner of that mortgage company called me up and ripped me up and down, said, this has never been the case, you moron. And they were out of business 6 months later as the market's imploding.
yeah. They're
It's
probably
like,
in jail
darn,
too. So just for those that are
wouldn't
listening.
surprise me.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because so I actually had it on my list to ask you about pressure from realtors or lenders or whoever, homeowners to or buyers even. I mean, is that a thing?
And since the Dodd-Frank Act was passed, we can't even really communicate with loan officers anymore. So that aspect of it is not really a thing anymore. Homeowners are pretty good about not pressuring. It's really a third degree felony for someone to pressure an appraiser in a mortgage transaction.
Shut the front door.
So
You're making that up.
in Ohio, yeah, not every state, but in Ohio,
It's a felony
it is.
to
It's a
pressure
felony. Yeah.
an appraiser.
Hmm.
What about bribing an
Yeah.
appraiser? Not with cookies.
Even more. No. Well,
That's worse.
yeah. No. No. No.
That's
I'm
worse.
sure that's part of it. That's probably part of it. Yeah. Yeah. So, but there have been times in the past where they would put some heat on me, and it was rare though. Truthfully, it was rare.
Yeah.
But what usually happened, like before '08, I started losing my business. It was really going down before '08 because the market, it was crazy, as you probably
I
remember.
remember.
And they would say, hey, the homeowner's estimated value is this. I'd say, oh, good. And then I go out and do the appraisal, and I'm like, the market value is this, and it was lower than they wanted. And they didn't put pressure on me; they just didn't use me anymore. So my business
Ah.
started going down in that time period. And then when '08 hit, and then yeah, Dodd Frank, so that helped a
And
little.
as an aside, and people are curious why bad things happen. This is it. You get into somebody's wallet, and that person, speaking for myself, has two choices. I can put my toe on the slippery slope, or I can sleep like a baby. So,
That's it.
but I will tell you, there are times when it is more difficult than others to keep your feet off the slippery slope, particularly
Absolutely.
when real life enters into the picture. So, congratulations, you made it through there intact because a lot of people didn't. A lot of appraisers didn't. A lot of
Yeah.
lenders didn't. A lot of realtors didn't because it was just too much. It was too tempting and it was too awful. I think you and I have talked offline a little bit about some of the crazy conversations that went down during that time. I just, I still think about like, I'm sitting in my office thinking, how is this legal? And it turns out it wasn't. So
Go figure.
crazy. So, but anyway, so you don't get a ton of that pressure anymore. That's good
I
to
really
hear.
don't.
So, is there anything a homeowner can do? I mean, it sounds like this. No, but I'm going to ask anyway. If I get a low appraisal, I'm the realtor and I'm representing the homeowner. Either one of us have anything we can do to, what did you call it? I say
A
appeal.
reconsideration of
Can I get you
value
to
or appeal.
reconsideration the
Yeah.
value? Can I get a
Yeah.
reconsideration of the value? Is there anything I can do? Because historically, it's not a very successful process. But
Yeah.
what
There,
sways
there
you?
is, there's a process in place for that. And I've not gone through that process since they've had these new guidelines put out there, but it's basically the same. You get some sales that the agent thought were good comparables. They'll send them to me, and I'll take a look at them, and I'll either agree or I'll disagree, and then I've got to explain why I disagree. Most of the time, I disagree, but there have been times where it's like, that's a compelling comp that I missed, and I do think it does warrant a higher number, and I will change the number because I'd rather get it right than dig in I mean, we're not perfect, so we can miss things.
Sure.
I'd rather not dig in, just fix it.
Right.
So, but most of the time, a lot of times I've already looked at the sales that they're sending me, and I'll tell you what's really funny is almost every time, at least one or two of the sales I already used. It's like comp 4 or 5, and they didn't even read through my report long enough to see that I did use them. But when you make the adjustments,
Yeah, it's
so
not there.
yeah,
So for
no,
us, our low appraisal playbook, which is actually coming up in a future episode, we use the reconsideration of value period. We use it to stop the clock and buy time while we renegotiate with the buyer's camp to either reduce concessions or to shift the property taxes from long form to short form, or some way,
mm,
somehow we got to get the gap between the top line and the bottom line for the seller. We got to close that gap or the deal's going to die. And many times
yeah,
we have to get into some very uncomfortable conversations about commissions and stuff like that. But while we're waiting for the appeal, which usually takes a little bit of time, sometimes a few days, sometimes longer, depending on the situation. And some of that, a lot of that has to do with the lender, because sometimes the lender has a process before they can even ask for a reconsideration. So it's for
exactly.
people that are hating on Jamie here, it's not him. He's not the holdup. But anyway,
Sometimes it doesn't even get to us.
right, exactly.
The bank's like, no, this report looks
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
This data didn't help you.
But we do it anyway. We go through the motions, and I
Mhm.
tell the seller, look, this is a snowball's chance. This is a Hail Mary. But let's use the time to see if we can't come to some new arrangement where maybe you give a little and they give a little, and maybe we meet somewhere in the middle. So that's kind of how we take it. Okay. So other than so what if a new comp has come along since you did your report? Would that affect you at all or not?
No, because the value is set to a specific date in time, and we can't go back and change that date. Like this was the value as of this date. So, and that's happened to me where a gray comp sold a couple days later, and the banks asked, and our value is based on this date. So what they will do is they've had me do a second appraisal where I can use this comp, and it's worth it to them. Yeah, I have to do it by the book, but that way they're doing it by the book, and yeah, you're paying for two appraisals, but
You got to do another walkthrough, a desktop at that point? I guess it depends.
yeah, for the same lender, yeah, for the same lender, you could do a desktop.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's the same client, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll keep that in mind because that has happened to us where the perfect comp comes rolling down the hill, a week after we get this disappointing, we'll call it, appraisal. So then we
Yeah,
could maybe negotiate with the other parties to say, hey, what if we split the cost, or what if we find a way to order a new appraisal from the same appraiser?
yeah. If the bank will if the
If they
bank
will.
will allow it,
If they will.
and
Somebody
it
votes.
probably would.
Everybody gets
You
a
know,
vote. Why does everybody get a vote?
yeah.
They should just listen to me.
I will say that sale that closed was probably a pending sale, and we may have even considered it, but until it's closed,
Until it's closed.
until it closes.
So, what kind of contact as a listing agent, as a homeowner, if I'm not represented, what kind of contact can I have? Because I'm going to get your information, because you're going to have to
Mhm.
set up a walkthrough, which means you're going to come through me or the homeowner or showing time, or somehow, some way, I'm going to know who you are and that you're the appraiser. Is there, is there, I mean, aside from the common sense, not offering you money or cookies, apparently, I can't even believe that, not
I
offering
love
you a
cookies too, but
bribe,
dang.
not bribing you to influence you unduly. But can we have conversations? Do you want to know about the deal? Like, do you want to know that I
Yeah,
had 5 other offers and that, do you want to know that kind of context?
I definitely want to know that because that helps me to do a better job of appraising the property. If you got a bunch of offers, I'd like to know because that shows some market demand. And now, is it going to appraise? I don't know, but I have to consider that. Like,
Mhm.
okay, all these people are willing to spend this amount. So yeah, we have to consider that.
What if I showed you 3 backup offers that were in roughly the same price range? Would that influence you at all?
It does help. It does help. We still have to use closed
I
sales,
got it.
but but it can help.
Okay.
And it also helps me to make the case because maybe there's one comp that really supports that number, the other two don't, but you've got all of these backup offers, and that would make me feel warm and fuzzy that okay, this is probably it,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though only one comp is supporting the number.
Well, it's
You know,
and I don't know how other realtors do it. I just can tell you on our side, when we're in multiples, we do not reveal, even if the seller wants me to. We don't say, "Hey, the highest is here. Can you beat it?" We don't do that because we feel like that's impeding the process in a way that hurts the seller. Because if I give them that number and they would have gone 10,000 higher, now what am I doing? So that's kind of our
yeah,
argument to the seller. But when we guess, to me it is uncanny when, and it happens so often when we get multiples and they're like dangerously close to being the same terms. It's crazy to me. And to me, that just screams this is market value. So
yeah.
I do put that in
Couldn't
my
agree with you more.
I do put that in my argument during the appeals, by the way. I'll throw all that in. Sounds like I should have done it before that, though, if I was going to reveal
I
that
think so.
information. Okay. So that's not out
I
of
think
bounds,
so.
though. I can do that. I can
No.
contact you and certainly ask if you have questions or whatever. Whoops. Sorry. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Same with
Yeah.
the homeowner. They can ask you
Mhm.
questions, things like that. What about
Yeah.
flipping? Does flipping screw with you, or is that just another appraisal?
Nah, it's just another appraisal, but we do have to explain, if it was purchased
Right.
real low and then it's selling real high, you have to be able to explain why.
Yeah.
But if they've renovated the home, great. Or they got it for a great deal, you know, and then they're reselling it, but they didn't do a lot to it, but they just got it for a great deal. It was a distressed sale, and now they're just flipping it that way. But I have to be able to explain it.
Got it. We do. I mean, we deep dived the FHA flip rules and stuff like that a couple of episodes ago with a lender, and that was fascinating to me. But outside of that, okay, so it's just essentially, unless something really crazy happened in the last 90 days, like you said, they bought it for 50,000 and they're sell it for 300, then we're going to need some more information to help us. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But if the sales are there and they're comparable to what it is now, and that's the market value, that's fine. We just have to explain it,
Mm-hmm.
so it makes sense.
Some sellers will come to us and they'll sign up with us, but they're not ready to list yet because they're doing stuff to the house. They think that touching up the landscaping, in my opinion, I think they're, and I'm not trying to sway you here, I think they're confusing what a buyer thinks versus what an appraiser thinks by saying, well, I'm going to have new counters installed or I'm going to do this bathroom reno. To is that still just unique to the comps, unique to the market, unique to the time, those types of renovations? There's no rule of thumb that says, oh yeah, you should, if you renovate your kitchen, you're going to get all that money back plus X.
Yeah, no, there's no rule of thumb on that. A lot of times you don't get a dollar for dollar return, but you can get a really good return, but it's usually not dollar for dollar. So, yeah, and things like landscaping is really, that's a tough one. And it depends on the market too. If you're in a new development and this one house has just grass and that's it, and all the comparable sales, they spent 80,000 bucks in landscaping and trees, and that could make a value
Yeah,
difference.
because there's demand
But
there. And where there's demand, there's
exactly,
value.
there's value. Exactly.
Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like realtors or homeowners to know? Like something we haven't talked about? Like, man, if I could just get a room full of these people together, this is what I would tell them. Is there anything like that? Anything burning on your mind? You don't have to answer this if you don't want
That's a good question. Just we're human.
to.
I know when we're going in, when I've had appraisers appraise my home for my wife and I are getting a refi. It's such a weird thing because I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I'm an appraiser and I'm nervous. The appraiser's coming in. There's this weird vibe. They're judging me. They're judging my house. But truthfully, we're just humans and we're trying to support our number. But if you get upset, try to remember that, and that's probably the best thing. I don't get a lot of people that are upset,
That's
but
good.
sometimes,
Um,
yeah,
I once made the
obviously.
statement, and this may not make it into the final recording. A while back, I made the statement that if you hired 3 appraisers, property's not on the market. This is a blind appraisal, if you will. I don't know if there's a term for that, but you hire 3 different appraisers to come in and appraise your property. It's not on the market. Doesn't have a contract. That I would give away my signed Cameron Hayward Pittsburgh Steelers game jersey, which I value very highly. By the way, there's demand for that because it's valuable. But anyway, I said I would give it away if all 3 appraisers came in with the exact same number.
Yeah.
Is my jersey safe? Is my jersey safe?
I think so. But I do think if all the appraisers are appraising the same property on the same day and all things are equal, it should be reasonably close.
I grant you that. I think it should be close. I just think that they won't be the same. And that's so that gets to probably a little itchier subject, which is, well, you used the word opinion, supportable opinion of value. You did not say fact of value.
Correct.
Because if that were the case, we wouldn't necessarily need appraisers. We just need a fancy computer program, feed in the variables.
That's exactly right.
Boom, we have value. So there is to your point, you are human. We should treat you as a human, but we should also understand you're a human, and all humans are going to approach things slightly differently. So, well, that is good. I really appreciate it. Is there any final advice you would give to home sellers on navigating the appraisal process? Because like you just said, it keeps a lot of them awake. They worry and wring their hands. Is it all for naught? Like, don't worry about it. It's going to go where it's going to go.
I would say don't worry about it, but I would say you act as an advocate. There's a difference between advocating for yourself and your property versus pressuring the appraiser. So provide the data that you think supports the number you think it is. Provide the sales. Now, if the appraiser doesn't use them, that's fine. That's their choice. But I do think it helps. It's going to help to some degree. If an appraiser really cares about getting the market value right and they're professional, they're going to accept it. They may not use it, but they're going to accept it and look it over. So that's what I would say. Just give the appraiser as much information as you can, and then let the chips fall where they do.
And don't beat up on the appraiser, please.
Yeah,
got it.
Please.
Is there a favorite kind of cookie? You said chocolate chip. Is that?
I love all cookies.
You and me both. So where can people say hello to you? Should I just link to your website or email? If people want to find out more about what you're doing and maybe have some questions about the process, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, best way is my main website, which is aspenappraisalservices.com, or my blog at the clevelandappraisalblog.com. And I've been a little slow at posting data on there the last 3 months. It's been a nutty few months for me with work, but I'll be posting more information.
I'll tell you, content it's a commitment. It really is. I promised my team I would do a podcast a week for a year, and we'll see where it goes. And I'm telling you, sometimes I'm like 3 or 4 episodes ahead. Life is good, and other times I'm like the night before banging it out. Like, but so I can appreciate your pod or your blog being a hit or miss, because it's not like you're a professional blogger. You are a professional appraiser who happens to blog. So
exactly,
we'll give you a pass on that.
Thank you.
So good. Well, thank you. I can't thank you enough for your time, your generosity, your willingness to share your inside view of the appraisal process, Jamie. I hope you have a fantastic day, and hopefully tons of people come to your website and try to hire you so you can double your rates.
Oh, thank you very much for saying that. And thank you for having me on the program. It's been a true joy. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Glenn.
Excellent. Thanks, Jamie.
You bet.
Thanks for sticking around. I know this was a long one, but Jamie just has a lot of great information to give home sellers, and I didn't want to leave anything out. Hopefully, you learned a little something, maybe had some fun, and if so, please share this episode with someone, or maybe even on the socials. Feel free to tag me if you do. The Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by Associates Title and the Ohio Property Group, a family-owned brokerage serving all 88 Ohio counties with realtor services. By the way, if you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the future, maybe even a guest you'd like to see on here, I'd love to hear from you. Just head over to talkingrealty.com and say hello. If you're interested in the video version of this, our YouTube channel, which you can link to at talkingrealty.com, has complete videos of every one of these episodes. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep making smart moves in your real estate journey. For the Ohio Property Group, this is Glenn Whitten signing off. And remember, you can sell it. We can help.